Hello there, Seraphim17 once again. This is more Dark Souls PvP, Iron and Rust. In the previous episode, I was talking about Elden Ring and its PvP. And because the game on PC was an interesting mess of performance problems for people, all of them being different, my particular problem just so happened to be stutters. And if you watch any of my level 1, New Game Plus 7, no roll, no parry, no block, no damage videos, which I did lots, you'll notice every so often my game just stutters and slows down and freezes, and it was awful. It was really, really problematic. It actually made me play the game less than I wanted to. And I already put a lot of time into the game, but I would have put double into it if it would have enabled me to do the things I wanted. And the biggest issue is I tried to swap rings just then on someone who didn't backstab me. Always good. The biggest issue is I wanted to try the PvP to see if I'd like it. But I wasn't able to do it, of course, because it was stuttering. And the biggest problem with the stutters is you get them, but your opponent doesn't. So when I'm fighting against the engine, it's frustrating, but the engine is doing prescribed things. Against another human mind, especially in this game where it's a lot of corpers as well, a lot of gankers, it just wouldn't have been viable. So I avoided doing it. And I thought at the time that they'll patch the stutters, they'll get on top of it, they'll fix it. You know, it's this incredible, massive game, absolutely viral, so many copies sold, so many people interested in it, so many people talking about Elden Ring that have never talked about Souls before. A wonderful moment to be a fan of these types of games. But it took them ages to fix it, and even now it's not completely fixed for a lot of people. So it all depends on your particular setup, and at the time there were all these little fixes on how to get around it and how to make it not happen, and a friend of mine showed me a fix that worked for him, and I did it and it didn't work. And the irony is my friend didn't even beat Elden Ring. He had one playthrough. And he had no stutters. Yet I wanted to do as much with the game as I could, and my game did nothing but stutter, which is just how it always lands sometimes, isn't it? So when it finally did get patched, I didn't want a PvP. Which isn't that just bloody typical? So I'd gone from, I'd like to try this thing, to, I guess I'm not going to get to try this thing, to, I don't really want to try this thing. So what I ended up doing, because I was still curious, and I'm always curious about the games, even if I'm not playing them too much. I looked like I was going to get backstabbed then. Whew, got lucky on that one. I ended up subscribing to Stilovsky, who is a player who's been around the block. He was there in the Dark Souls 1 days. I didn't personally know of him, but I since learned some things about him. And he plays that game quite a lot, and he's very competitive, and he's competitively minded. And he makes some cool videos. So through him, I lived vicariously in Elden Ring PvP, seeing some of the stuff, seeing the meta, seeing the strategies, seeing what people were up to, and how it shifted and adjusted. And from that, I kind of decided that it probably wouldn't have been the most fun for me personally, because of a lot of the things I like about Elden Ring's PvP, like the poise counting, and the varied movesets with the crouch attacks, and with the Ashes of War adding an extra dimension, and some of the smaller things as well, like the jumping attacks changing a lot of things. All of these factors sound like a really good thing, because they're adding variation, and variation is what keeps you playing in games, it's what keeps it fresh. But I think we can all agree when we look at PvP in any game, players, especially the lesser interested players, will oftentimes gravitate towards the most simplest path of least resistance. And if you play a game like Call of Duty, that might mean they use the same gun and the same perk, and that's all they do. So you see that all the time, and thus you start to demonize that particular setup because it reminds you of everything you bump into, and creatively the game feels a little bit stilted and a little bit unenjoyable. That's what Elden Ring's PvP kind of looks like in many ways when you watch it casually, if you're not that interested, because you see the same weapons, and you see the same weapon arts. And I don't mind seeing the same weapons, that's just something that's bound to happen. It's when people don't even swing them, they just use that ridiculous pyrotechnic effect where it turns into Chinese New Year, as Aris says, and everything just involves fireworks and everything involves flying and smoke and particles and AoEs, and it's just... Oh, speaking of AoEs, I got sucked in on that one. That was fun. That, to me, is less interesting. I'm not a big fan of everybody just flying around and dive bombing with massive lightning and stuff. And that does seem to be what 90% of the PvP is. It's things like the storm stomping and whatnot, and a lot of the nuance kind of gets lost, and a lot of the things that could be really fun, you tend not to see. And that doesn't mean that, oh, he's still alive and I didn't know. There's me letting him get back up when I should have killed him. This is the problem with this, which is actually fixed now, because we don't have to play on this kind of honor system of seeing who's still alive. We now have Dragon Blood, which is an amazing mod that lets us know when we've died. And just then, I swapped to the offhand Black Flame to put him down. And you might be thinking when I say that, well, Chris, the idea of people using the same thing sounds exactly like Dark Souls PvP. And it absolutely is. Everybody used the Claymore. Everybody used, you know, the Chaos Blade. Everybody used the Darkwood Grain Ring. You always saw giants. You always saw Havels. You always see things... I mean, nowadays you see a lot more Murakumos. Back in the day, you didn't see this weapon that much, which is absolutely hilarious considering how bloody good it always was. But you saw certain things. How many times did you see the Great Sword of Artorias and Artorias' shield? How many times did you see the Black Knight Great Axe? And then they nerfed it, and you still saw the bloody thing because it was so unique in as much as it hit like a truck, but it didn't hit like it used to. It used to hit like 50 trucks flying a jet directly into your forehead. That was bizarre, and again, I didn't mean to do it. If you ever see me throwing fireballs, it's because I'm trying to cancel them. I think he damage cancelled that, didn't he? That was weird. Oh, and then I get parried when I'm unlocked. Never good. What does he do on wake up, though? And what do I do? Let's watch this. I go for a slightly delayed wake up, then I go to try and catch the parry on the attack. He doesn't do it, he runs around. I go for the backstab, he goes for the backstab, and he gets it. GG. Mind games, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm not winning them. Not in that particular instance, anyhow. So Elden Ring's PvP is an interesting thing to watch. But do you know what I do like about it? Especially when it's on the better ping. On PC, apparently, it's fucking awful. It just looks dumb. Except if we mention Seamless, which sounds really awesome. And I did build, believe it or not, I built a character for Seamless because I wanted to finally give the game a go. Soon as that introduced invasions, because I've used Seamless Corp a lot, it's a really cool mod and I recommend it highly. When they introduced invasions to that, I felt like there was no excuse not to make a PvP guy. So I made like a sword and board, like you're looking at here. I made a katana with a shield, and I made an armor set that looked cool. And I had every intention of giving it a go. And you know what happened? I saw a video of Dark Souls 1, two people fighting in the Burg, and not dying, and not disconnecting. And it set off a series of chain reactions, that lead to this commentary. If it had not been for Seamless getting invasions and me being interested in trying those invasions, I would have never found that video between Molby and Izalith and being introduced to this niche community and feature of exactly what you're watching right now. And that's the reason why I've credited those people in the description, because without that video I would have had no real understanding that this existed, because it's quite hard to find information about some of this stuff, and YouTube can be really good sometimes at showing you something cool and something you might want to watch, but it's way better at showing you fucking bullshit and bollocks and all kinds of crap you don't want to see, and then hiding the good stuff, which, you know, it's the scourge of every YouTuber. And speaking of the Black Knight Great Axe, look at that, dude. That's what that weapon can do. If you start running into it and you don't start respecting it, it happens, man. Been a long time since I got laced up like that with that axe, but it's good to know it can still do it. But it's just so funny to think that, in as much as the Elden Ring might not be the PvP for me, and it's something I indeed have got no interest in, because of it, I'm back in the Burg. And I owe it a lot, and I'm thankful for that. Because I think as you get older, you come to understand that sometimes the constituents that lead to the journey are better than the journey itself, or even the destination. You know, we spend a lot of time in life fixating on goals, fixating on these arbitrary measuring sticks, and sometimes while you're doing that, you forget to live. You forget right in that moment that life is that thing that happens in spite of the plans that you make. Oh, there you go. More madness with the fireballs. None of this is intentional, guys, but once you start doing it, you've got to commit to it, and it's been a long time since I've free-handed pyromancies, and I'm not very good at it anymore. A lot of the skills there have completely gone. So I go for a cheeky reverse roll, and we get an interesting backstep. This is a cool fight right here, because just then, I should have hit him on that R1, but I didn't. And then afterwards, he should have hit me, but he didn't. So there was this interesting dance of expectation and spacing. And on his screen, he was probably like, what? And on my screen, I was certainly like, what? And then boom, I get parried, because this happens a lot. And then the riposte didn't work, which is unfortunate. I got very lucky then. And this is the footage where I couldn't kick. Not being able to kick in Dark Souls doesn't sound like a huge disadvantage, but trust me, guys. The ambiguity of attacking versus kicking is a threat that you always need to represent. And I just don't have it here, and it leads to essentially a bit of a deadlock where I can't pressure outside of running and trying to get a pivot backstab or trying to poise backstab. And right now in this particular encounter, I can't poise this unless I toggle. And I'm not one of those players that wants to go for the backstab every time. It's the smart thing to do, but it doesn't mean it's the thing that you want to do, because it can make it really frustrating for you, the person you're playing against, and I don't want to frustrate these people. I want to have a good time. That's a bad idea, though. That could have been a backstab. Additionally, you'll notice then on Wake Up, instead of trying to hit him with combustion and this fight would already be over, I tried to play the next step. I tried to predict where I thought he would go, and because he'd backstabbed my combustions a couple of times, I waited a second, delayed it, and then tried to combust behind me, but he didn't do the same Wake Up, so it ended up not being very lucrative. And this player is interesting because they can be very creative in their playstyle, even though they're rocking 28 poise, which is admittedly a little bit low for a new player, unless you want to become a toggle god at least. But that player is so creative sometimes, and then at other times so fixated on the backstabs. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because we all know that backstabs are really good. And we also all know what you're supposed to do when someone's trying to backstab you. But those 2 points don't always meet each other. And in this session, you might have noticed that there's been lots of opportunities for me to do the counter backstab on the circling, and I've not done it. And you might be wondering, like, what's he doing? Like, why is he doing that? He's giving away free damage and whatnot. And the reason for it, in spite of the fact I do get backstabbed quite a lot, is because I know what it's like to get backstabbed. I've been backstabbed thousands of times, and I don't really mind it. Some of these players haven't. So if they fight against me and all I do is backstab them, what kind of impression are they going to get of what this game is? They're going to get a false impression, because let's face it, Dark Souls 1 is fucking backstabs. That's what it always was and it always will be. But that doesn't mean, in every circumstances, that it has to be that way. So I wanted to show some of these people, and this is not a morality thing or an ethics thing, this is not me being like, I'm so much better than the average person, I'm going to give you a wonderful time. That's not what it's about. It's the idea of, I wanted to show some of these members of my community that this game is about more than just getting stabbed in the back. Even though the threat of the backstab is always looming, it's the shark that never leaves. And this ended up in me getting backstabbed a lot, which is cool, because again, I don't mind it. I've seen it, I've done it, I understand it, but it's for the people that don't. And if your first experience to Dark Souls is just getting relentlessly stabbed in the back, if you're a strong personality and you really want to get better and you're really in the mood to get good at Dark Souls 1, then you're going to do just fine. But if you're not, then you're going to have a bad time. And I keep saying this in these videos. I keep saying this idea that I did not come back to X, right? And it's true. I have no interest in asserting my backstab knowledge on players that don't know how to defend them. Because to me, it's a fucking pointless endeavour. And if it results in people having a bad time, what have I really done? You know? And I'm fortunate now that my competitive instincts are nowhere near as strong as they used to be. Because let's face it, when you compete with somebody in anything, sometimes you will hurt people's feelings. And as much as it's just a game, there has to be a loser. And losing sucks. And sometimes losing sucks worse than others. And here's the thing. You have to be a very certain type of person to enjoy losing. And I think we all have a threshold when it comes to what is an understandable response to losing in a competitive environment. And for me, it's very simple, especially in this game. If I feel like you're outplaying me, then I will lose for hours and have a good time. If I feel like what you're doing is lame and shit, I probably won't be as enjoyable or as receptive to the loss as I normally would. And I might be a bit of a salty bitch, which I think we're all guilty of sometimes. And I think it's a call, isn't it, like anything else? It's all indicative of the situation. It's all indicative of who you are in that moment and what your expectations were when you came into that situation. And that's why I didn't say to any of these players, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do that. I didn't set any restrictions or any regulations. All I said is that we're gonna have some fun fighting in the Burg. Whatever that means to you is up to you. And I let those people show me who they are as a player, show me what their standards are, or what their expectations were. And I feel like everybody confidently in this session had a really good showing, which is what I wanted it to be. And hopefully, you guys have enjoyed it as well. And there was a couple of players that I tried to get sessions with that I didn't because we couldn't schedule them, which is okay. And it would have been nice for the variation, but because we did do a decent session and we got a variety of different matches, I still think there's something here to sink your teeth into. And although I haven't talked about too much of what's happening, we've been talking more about nostalgia and about the concept of PvP and some of my experiences with it. In the background, there have been hopefully some fun and some competitive moments going on that scratch that nostalgic itch for Dark Souls. Because that's what we're going for. And I did mention that there were certain things about Elden Ring's PvP that I did like, and then I went off on a tangent, as I often do. And I do apologise when I don't come back to tangents. I can be quite good at coming back to them, but other times I can be terrible. The things I like about the PvP in Elden is I really like the idea of the poise catching. Sorry, the poise counting, bloody hell. I think the poise counting is interesting because it exists in this game as well. But in Elden, it's way more complicated because there's more armor, there's more weapons, and there's potentially more attacks that affect that statistic. And if you've never heard of that term, guys, it's just adding up every bit of stun you inflict on your opponent in a certain amount of time. In these games, usually, if you go without being attacked for a little while, your stun bar will go down. In this game, it's, I think, something like 4 to 5 seconds. In Elden Ring, I don't know what it is. I don't know enough about it, sadly. But it's the idea that if you keep up the pressure on your opponent, eventually they will crack. And you understanding what their armor means and what their number is and what you're inflicting is one of the things that separates you from another player. And knowledge in PvP in Souls games is one of the most important aspects and one of the things that makes it the most fun. So they took what exists in Dark Souls 1 and they built on it in an interesting way that I think sounds really cool. The other thing that I really like is, in theory, although the lag doesn't always afford for this, is the spacing. One of my favourite aspects about Souls now, especially when I do PvE, is I like to beat the bosses without rolling or parrying or blocking. And when you say that to some people, they get a bit confused because they don't really understand what you mean. And it's something that's known as no-roll, which is not new, it's been around for donkey's years now. But it's the idea of circumventing damage by being creative with movement and using the tools the game gives you. And when those two things come together, they can form a really elegant dance of just walking and running and just not being where the damage is, where the attacks are, and making the boss look incapable of hurting you, and it can be really, really cool. But it teaches you a fundamental of any combat game, which is the distance between you and your enemy when your weapon is active. That distance changes dynamically at all moments. That dance of understanding when you're in range, when you're not in range, that right there is the building blocks of spacing. And all of these games have it. Because it's just essentially, it's just a manifestation of depth perception, isn't it? And object permanence. These things we learn from a very young age are now being used and utilised for us to compete in a digital realm. And that, to me, is what I really like about watching Elden Ring. It seems like when you know a weapon and the ping's good enough, you can sprint to the side and just get out of the way of it, or you can crouch at the right time and it'll just go beyond you. And these little bits of knowledge of movement and space translating into you having an advantage or being able to beat an opponent is something that I think sounds fantastic. And then the final thing, which leads off of the idea of spacing, is the roll catching. So roll catching is something that has existed since Demon's Souls, but I don't know if people were calling it that. And one thing you'll notice in this game, guys, is there's times when we hit each other and you hear the noise and you see the blood, but people don't take damage. And you might be wondering, well, what the fuck's that about? This is just laggy and unplayable. What is this? Well, the idea here is on my screen I hit him, but on his screen he dodged. And because the game doesn't always sync up, it can be very, very tough to understand what's really happening. And the idea, of course, is that because you can be invincible, thanks to iframes, you can't just go up to somebody and whack them and know that you're going to hit them. Because if they roll well, they can't be hurt. So then you start asking the question, don't you? Well, how do I hurt this person then if he's invincible? Well, those iframes don't last forever. They're finite. And if you go up to somebody and you try to whack them, their brain's going to go, well, he's going to whack me now, so I need to avoid it. So they're going to maybe try to roll or try to block or try to avoid taking that damage. And this is where that chess versus checkers comparison comes in. If you're the type of player where every time you swing, you roll afterwards because you're terrified of the repercussions of your actions, if you're the type of player that rolls on a pattern repeatedly without ever watching what your opponent is doing in response to your actions, you then leave yourselves open for a punish. And there's lots of punishes, but the punish that we're discussing, of course, is roll catching, which is catching you on an attack as you become vulnerable in your roll. And rolls have startup frames, they have active frames, and then they have recovery. The iframes tend to be at the front of the roll towards the middle, and then at the end, from that middle to the end, is where the vulnerability window is. So if you know that somebody likes to roll and you predict that roll and you delay your attack, you can hit them as they recover. And that is the basis of all roll catching in any kind of games. It's catching recovery. It's just like a fancy way of saying that. And you see that in these videos. You will see moments where we intentionally wait out attacks, trying to get that punish. Sometimes we're successful, sometimes we're not. Because the big kicker here is, everyone's going to do things on different timings, and the more you play, those timings need to change, because if they stay the same, you'll be punished for them. And you'll have noticed, when I fight this player, they attack at the same time I do, and I'm using a lighter weapon than them, so they do a lot more damage, and thus they win the trade. In a war of attrition like that, I am not going to be successful. I have to pick better times and use better solutions. If I don't do that, I lose. It's that simple. I get a setup parry just then, which is nice, and now he's one hit away from death, which this looks really good for me. What do? I go for the backstep, I do the running attack, he's defensive, he moves away. Defensive play in Dark Souls is incredibly powerful. Shields are amazing. Moving backwards is also very strong too. However, the reason we're fighting in the Burg is the Burg has walls, and wherever there are walls, it means there's a limit to where you can run away. Having that limitation makes these fights more interesting, even though the Burg is quite a good size, and it's It's enough for a good player to navigate without having to worry too much about being pinched. As we get another parry there on the prediction. And shout-outs to this player. Of all the sessions I did, they were the hardest person to parry, even though some of the footage might not make it look that way, because it became difficult to predict when they were going to swing. Because the dance turned more into trying to time the claymore and the greatsword than it did trying to parry it, because it felt dangerous. And a lot of the times when I threw the parry out flippantly, they backstabbed me for doing it, which is a really good hard counter to parrying. And people will say things like parry spam, and everyone has a different understanding of what parry spam is. That was interesting and dangerous. To me, if the only thing you really do is kind of run around being evasive and then start using your shield to parry, you could be accused of being a parry spammer, and I think you could probably agree with that observation. But at the same time, it is a technique, it is a strategy, and some people really like to do it. Me personally, I am more of the prediction of I'll like to see what you do and then hopefully try to time something with you. But that doesn't mean that I'm immune to doing the classic walk up and parry, like something like that. I know that this player likes to swing a few times on me, and I know that he doesn't quite understand that I have the poise to take that hit, so I can go for something known as a poise parry, which is what I did just then. And it ended up working. So in that situation, it's a educated guess. And it's the same with the setup parry that I did. Not everyone's going to swing multiple times. Especially if you parry them enough, they learn that swinging twice in a row can be very dangerous on someone's shield. However, lots of people in Dark Souls didn't know how to do it. And if you don't know how to do it, there's no danger. And you'll notice just then, he delayed. One of the biggest strengths this player has is that. Just the foresight to delay. Delaying your attacks, guys, is very clever. And then he comes forward and I can get a nice counter backstab, and I needed that. Then I try and cut him off with a fireball. It doesn't quite work because it only takes 33 damage, but the idea was there. If I'd have been using the better fireball, the Great Chaos Fireball I think it's called, with the lava, he would have stood in the lava, that might have been the end of the fight. But again, I only put that fireball on to do cancels, and I ended up... oh damn. That, ladies and gentlemen, is why you don't roll away with your back to someone. Oh, and then I get chained. And that's the end of that fight. Again, I did not recover the right way. He read how I was going to escape, and he shut me down. That is Dark Souls, and it's my fault. But here we go again. Chaos Blade versus Chaos Blade. There's the punish on the R2. What do we do on Wake Up? Goes for the R1. Catch him with a rolling attack. We go for the trade. I get 500 damage from it. He's going to go for a parry. Could have backstabbed him then, but apparently I wasn't thinking. Here's the rolling attack. That could have been a parry again. I didn't read him well enough. I'll go for the backstab. I don't get it. And then we're both down to quite low life. I go for the setup parry. And unfortunately for him, he doesn't know that swinging twice on my shield like that's a bad idea. If he watches this video, maybe he'll learn that. And if not, I'll bloody tell him, because I fought him in that free-for-all as well. I fought this player and that player at the same time. And it was really dumb. And speaking of really dumb, look at that cheeky poke. The claymore is such a scary weapon. But here we go. We got the R1s. We got the shield. We got the attempted roll backstab, and I catch it. What do we do on Wake Up? Go for the roll. Try and get the rolling attack. I change directions to try and get through his block if he guards. And here we go. Back into the dance. There's the black flame. It actually got through as well. Split damage though, so he didn't do too good. I overextend with a running attack. He backstabs me. What does he do? Rotates. I don't like my defense then, but it worked. So that's okay. And at the end of the day, it can be the stupidest thing you could have done. If it works, it's genius, right? That was interesting. Trying to bait with the pyromancy for the backstab and then going for the attack. Worst case scenario there, I get backstabbed. Best case scenario, I hit him and he loses. Middle ground, I hit him and it cancels the backstab damage. It was a risky play, but it worked out. And then again, you'll notice that I only have Black Flame on for this player, and it's because this player has one of the most ubiquitous poise breakpoints on the game, which is it 53, 54? Black Flame can only be poised at 61 poise. So I know that if I connect with this, I get a guaranteed stun. However, this player's not stupid. So when they're coming in and they're blocking, a lot of the times I would trade with their shield, and because that's the Black Knight shield, I think it has a 95 in fire defense, one of the highest fire defenses in the game. Just then, I thought he was going to go for the stun backstab, so I tried to rotate to get my back away from that position. It ended up not really being needed because he was going just for the hit. And one of the interesting mix-ups in this game is that when someone's stunned and the other player knows that they can do some shenanigans to backstab, it turns it into a guessing game of whether or not they're going to go for it or whether or not you're going to try and defend it and then going to go for you when you defend it. And the cool thing in that is, that's two scenarios that you have to guess. And in a fighting game, people call that a mix-up. Sometimes they'll call it a 50-50. That situation has additional layers to it as well. That was a toggle backstab, that one, guys. We'd been playing a little while at this moment and some of the old reflexes were coming back, which is always nice to see. So because there's those two options you can represent out of those stuns, they also lay the groundwork for you then to represent the capacity of doing an attack. So you can go for backstabs, which leads to two outcomes, or you can go for normal attacks or an R2, or you can even try to go for them to do a counter and then punish their counter. And all of these things you might not have been thinking about back in the day. I know I wasn't thinking about all of them. And that's what makes this so interesting and so unique. For a game that shouldn't have even had a multiplayer, it has a really compelling and surprisingly deep PvP. And that is why I love it, and that's why I'm sharing it. Thank you for watching, and you take care now.